Okay, we're on. I'd like to share with you another one of the great many jazz resources out there for improvisation, composition that have worked for me in playing and teaching. And here it is, George Garzone, the Triadic Chromatic Approach. This is great. Comes in a DVD too, and it's kind of unique to what George does, but you have to hear what George does, and it's really just great. There's a CD he put out with Joe Lovano called Fours and Twos, where they play Have You Met Miss Jones, and there's a line that goes on top of that form, that tune, and it's one of George's lines, and you gotta really get a sense of it, what he has going on when he creates lines. It's just great, especially if you want to check out George Garzone. Just Google him. He's all over the place on YouTube, but he has a system of coming up with these lines that I think it's uniquely his. Maybe some other people have done it, but I don't know who. But it's just great. It's just great when you hear George play it. And this is it. Jody Jazz puts it out, but Jamie, you can get it through Jamie Aebersold. Google it, you'll see where you can get it. But just a point of reference here with things like this. Let's say you like the way someone plays bebop. Okay, I'm going to separate from this for a second. Okay, you buy their book, and it tells you how to use the bebop scale. Okay, you practice it, you use it, and then you listen to the person who inspired you to get that book, and all of a sudden, maybe you're sounding a little bit like them, but there's a lot more that people use. I had a student come up and say, "Oh, I get McCoy Tyner. He plays pentatonics." Well, he does a lot more than that, but yeah, he does use pentatonics. But so the student started working with pentatonics, and then he wondered why he didn't sound like McCoy Tyner. Because these guys who play this grade, they may fall in love with a system or a device, and that device speaks to them, and they're going to use that device and make it their own, and that's kind of what happens. And what people hear is the final result at that time in the artist's development of where they are with that material. You know what I mean? I hope I'm making sense here, because I don't want to give the wrong impression. But what happens is, many times, I've been teaching for so long, the students will grab a technique and think they're going to sound like the person right away, and then when they listen to the person, sometimes they don't even hear that technique, because when a person plays, they're using a lot of other things. So this triadic chromatic approach that George put out, he runs you through, and I'm not going to give it away because you really need to get it. I'm not going to tell you what it says verbatim, but George has a way of linking together triads. It could be different types of triads, and there's some guidelines that he gives on how to do that. And he gives you some guidelines on how to play within a certain range, and and that's all I'm going to tell you about what it is. You have to check out what he's talking about to even get close to what he means. But if you follow the drills, and there's not even George, it's a lot of instinct, I think. But if you just do what he says, stuff starts to come out. Okay, so it's George doesn't give you licks to use. George doesn't say this fits over that chord. There's none of that. There's none of that. It's all his approach that he gives you opens it up. In other words, when you solo and you try it, it leads you to all these different places. At least when I started working with it, all of a sudden I'm over here, I'm over there. How did I get here? Whoa! It's a great technique. So that's you listen to George. Listen to when he plays. Check him out, and then when you hear him play like an 18th line, sometimes you're going to hear this what? Well, that's kind of what he's, I think, aiming at here. It's beautiful stuff. It's great. It's great. But check out Fours and Twos that he does with Lovano. You hear that, what he does all over the place. And Joe sounds great too. He always does. This is what happened to me when I started to work some of the stuff that George talks about. When you do what George asks you to do, he gives you some exercises, ways to think. For me, I found myself constantly paying attention to every little thing I was doing. It isn't as if you're playing G minor and the B flat major pentatonic fits over it, so you just go up and down, and I'm using the right device, so it must fit. But you're not really paying attention to the device. Maybe you could just be, oh, here's the pentatonic, and just kind of spit it out sometimes. When you do what George says, you're so mindful of everything you're doing because you're really thinking all the time about it. It has a way of keeping you constantly aware of what's going on, yet being at the same time really kind of free. It's I don't know, it's like a meditation, something when you start to mess with this. You can't just let it go and let it all just run itself out. That's not how it works. Yet it brings you to places that you've never been, so you have to be ready to react to kind of make these decisions. It's all good. It's all good, and it's hard to explain if you haven't listened to George or tried it. I love the way George plays. He's just great, and so I got a hold of this, and then when I started to work it, I found myself paying attention in a different way. It's you just don't drift. It's like some kind of awareness, almost like yoga jazz or something. You're just always in it, even though you're more available for other areas. I'm going around in circles now. George Garzone, the Triadic Chromatic approach. You've got to check out George. This is not beginning stuff. This is not, I'm going to learn all my scales and then I'm going to hop on to George Garzone's thing. It'll be a bumpy ride. But if you're playing for a while and you have some ideas of what's going on with improvisation, check this out. George is a great player, and he has other things going on. But this was so unique. When I heard him play, I had to figure out what the heck is he doing? What's at least his approach that can get me in that area? And I've had a couple students who worked with this, and it takes a while to get. It takes a while. It doesn't. Sometimes the really good stuff, you have to mine for it. It's like a gold mine. You're not just going to stand there and understand it and you'll have it. Some devices are like that, but some you have to get in the mine and chisel away, and you have to work for it. And when you do, when you get it, it's really great. So check out George first. Check out a lot of George, and when if you hear him play some of these lines, you're going to say, what? Because it doesn't fit. The scale fits the chord thing. He's got another thing going, and he gets a great sound out of it. And then here, DVD, George Garzone, the Triadic Chromatic approach. George is the best. George is great. So anyway, check it out.